Yes, he did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Well, thank you for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Good to have you with us. Lots to talk about. Let's meet our panelists, starting with the news director for the Big 550 KTRS. She's Wendy Wiese, along with one of our founders from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Mr. Bill McClellan. From rawstory.com, the RFT, which he founded in 1977, and 550 AM KTRS, Ray Hartmann. And a columnist for the St. Louis American, and he appears on 97.1 and 590 AM. We have Alvin Reid. Before we get into our big topics this week, I do want to mention that Ken Kwapis, a native of Belleville who became a great Hollywood director and has written about it in his new memoir, will join us for the second half. So, movie fans and fans of Big Bird here at PBS, stay tuned. Well, we lost some other great members of the St. Louis community and Cardinal Nation this week. First of all, Alvin Reid, number 45, Hall of Famer Bob Gibson, one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. Would you mind sharing a few words on behalf of Mr. Gibson?
Well, I mean, just a dominant pitcher, a man who was very disturbed by the racism of the 1960s, his great 1968 season. He has written several times that he was driven by the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. And just, in my column this week, he shared a story here where it was not allowed in the Cardinal clubhouse. If you had an issue with somebody, they talked about it and they worked it out. So he did so much more. But, just by the way, one of the, if not, greatest pitchers in this, just going back to win the game, obviously, was no longer segregated. And just one quick story. I think in 2000, ESPN put together a series of half-hour documentaries on, the 100 greatest athletes. And I was honored to be in the one about Bob Gibson. And when Carmen was pregnant, we were in Kansas City for the Missouri Press Association Awards. We're in Crowne Plaza. Push the elevator button. It goes, when the door opens, Bob Gibson is on the elevator. And I say, wow. Mr. Gibson, hi, I'm Alvin Reid. And, it's my wife, Carmen. We've met before. But I just wanted to tell you, I was really honored to be in that ESPN, documentary about you. And he said, I never watched it. And we rolled the rest of the way in silence.
Sounds like Gibson.
Yeah, that's
And it's almost unthinkable to have lost Lou Brock and Bob Gibson so close, so close together. And yet at the same time, it's very sweet, knowing that there was an editorial cartoon of, I think it was Gibson sliding into home and Brock was standing there and he said, "Welcome home," which I thought was, if you're the sentimental Cardinal fan, as I know Bill McClellan is, I know that even touched Bill McClellan, but he left so many great memories.
And he was from Omaha, as was Gale Sayers. And Alvin, you wrote about Gale Sayers in last week's column, as it turns out.
Yeah.
But locally, State Senator Wayne Good, who served for years and years in Jefferson City. Ray Hartmann, a few words for Senator Good.
First of all, I want to say Bob Gibson was my singular hero growing up because he was the greatest competitor I ever saw in any sport. But Bob Gibson was one kind of hero. Wayne Good was a hero to a lot of people as well. He was, pardon the pun, but he was as good as it gets. He was really a wonderful man. And you talk about somebody that was respected across the aisle, and he served decades. And he had a lot to do with UMSL being existing. And what a nice guy. So, real loss to all of us that Wayne passed away.
Nicely put.
He's also an argument against term limits. I mean, Wayne Good, it would have been a shame to have lost Wayne Good after 2 terms.
Big point.
Our thoughts with the Gibson and Good families. And Bill, we're going to pick things up right there with you. Turns out in St. Louis County, there is no money for an Afton police station. That was reported by your newspaper today. This after voters just a couple of years ago increased their taxes for Prop P. Some people thought that that money would go to new police stations in North County and in South County. It looks like the South County facility is on hold. At the same time, the St. Louis County Council, in its wisdom, decided to revote the matter that relinquished control of the CARES Act funds to the county executive. And this week, in a rare reversal, the St. Louis County Council revoted and they said, guess what? We want the authority to disperse that federal money. The only problem is out of $173 million, there's only $5 million left to hand out. So what do we make of these developments, Bill?
Well, I don't know. I thought that last one was particularly strange. It really is finally voting to close the doors to close the barn doors after the horses have left. You know, we've got to do something to show security. There's something about the dysfunction in St. Louis County that is beyond the normal realm of things. It seems like you can get good people and you put them in office in St. Louis County now, and something terrible happens to them. They become incompetent, if not prone to illegality. I mean, Sam Page, by all rights, should be a terrific county executive, and he hasn't been. And Lisa Clancy and the people on the county council, the incompetence is staggering. I don't know what to make of what's happened to government in St. Louis County.
Well, I have kind of a different point of view. One is, when it comes to the county council reversing itself, I agree. That's just kind of messed up. But when it comes to the Afton police station, my message is get used to it, everybody, because sales tax receipts are down. And I'm not even sure there's going to be enough money for police raises or 2 police officers per patrol car. Don't forget, we took some of that limited money and gave it to the nurses at the jail and the secretaries in the prosecutor's office. And we all thought that was okay. But now, with diminished economic activity in St. Louis County, this postponement of the police station in Afton is just the first of many things to come.
Yeah, but Charlie,
they're still moving ahead with the plans for the police station in North County, correct?
That's right. And it's probably needed there more. We admit that.
Well, we don't. First of all, Charlie, the broader issue here, and I'm getting a little tired of being on the Republican side of everything in the council, which should be nonpartisan anyway. But the broader issue is the use of Prop P money, because it got diverted for a lot of stuff. And there are things, whether your perspective is on the left, there, the money for cameras and sensitivity training that was supposed to be there, or on the right, I don't blame the people for being upset that these Prop P monies are. This isn't just a case of something related to COVID. They really mismanaged these funds.
But don't forget, Alvin, you'll point this out too, I know, that the ballot itself just said the money was for public safety. It never specified a North County police station or a South County police station.
But it's
I had both John Belmar and Steve Stenger in the studio talking about it, and they didn't mention any of these facilities.
And if everything we did, our plans were made budget-wise, okay, and you said, like, well, you know what? There may be an international crisis that drains the coffers a year from now or 6 months from now. Maybe we would all, plan differently. So excuse is too broad a term, but no one saw this coming, okay? So where that money went and how it was spent and all that, I think there would be a lot greater chance of this Afton, police precinct being constructed if it hadn't been for the pandemic. Now, I want to go with what Bill said in that, it's kind of like after, President Nixon left and Gerald Ford took over. Republicans, Democrats, everybody said, like, okay, no more messing up. We're going to have an election in, a couple of years or so, and let's just everybody just calm down. Well, the absolute opposite has happened in St. Louis County. Okay, the crook's gone. He went to prison. And then you thought you had people, Tim Fitch included and whatnot, that were all now going to behave like county government had behaved for 100 years. And it's like everybody took stupid pills or partisan pills, or let's make this a Republican versus Democrat, a black versus white, a North County versus South County. And it's just like, why? It's unnecessary. It's just, everything is just so unnecessary. I don't get it.
If the money was there, but I will say, I don't want to condemn everybody who works for the county, and I don't think you guys were doing that, but I recently had to get a special use permit for a project, and I had to go through the Department of Transportation in the county, and two of their workers were great, Jerry Duckworth and Brian McNamee. They were very professional. So hats off to those who are working hard in the county. We move on to you, Wendy Wiese. The McCloskeys, I guess, have been indicted by a grand jury. That's the word. We're talking about the gun-toting Central West End couple who are now up on, I guess, tampering with evidence charges and brandishing a firearm or something like that in an unlawful manner. Personally, I was hoping that this story would go away and the charges would be dropped. Don't you wish those charges were dropped?
I do. The indictment is sealed, so that lends even more mystery to it. I think what's happening is they are, as a result of this, they are becoming larger and larger on the folk hero stage. And they represent to a lot of people as we approach Election Day, whether you all agree with it or not, they represent those who are pro Second Amendment. And their stock is not falling, it is rising. And I don't know what that's going to mean down the road. But Governor Parson was asked at a press briefing yesterday afternoon, or immediately after the indictment, what he was going to do, and if he was going to keep his promise to pardon them. And he said absolutely. He said absolutely. He said we'll let the process play itself out, but I will absolutely pardon them.
That just shows how corrupt the state government is on this. Because let's face it. First of all, I disagree with you. I think Joel Schwartz is a friend of mine. He's one of the very best defense attorneys in town. We're not going to prejudge their guilt. We'll see what happens. But yeah, you do now. The Second Amendment does not provide for you brandishing weapons at peaceful protesters. And you not only have Parson irresponsibly offering a pardon before the charges were there because of Trump putting him on his Twitter account. But you also have Attorney General Eric Schmidt has already entered basically an amicus brief on behalf of the McCloskeys, and he has to defend the state, which is Kim Gardner, if it's appealed. So the conduct of the Republicans on this has been unconscionable. There's nothing wrong with charging these people. Let's see what happens.
I think the best thing to do is to chill out and enjoy the spectacle. The city voters reelected Kim Gardner, and this is what we get. Every couple of years, a show trial of one sort or another, and it'll be entertainment. It'll make us all look bad. The McCloskeys will do fine. Our friend Joel Schwartz can charge whatever he wants because the right wing is pumping money into this. But it's just a show trial, and we should be like the good citizens of Moscow and enjoy it.
I hear you. I would say this. If I were an attorney, show trial or not, I wouldn't want to be convicted of anything, and you could be pardoned, but all that means is you were pardoned. This will stick with them. But, I can't – look, what did I say when this all started? I did not want her to charge them. They are not worth this. This is embarrassing. This is not – it's a show trial bill, but it's also just stupid. And
Alvin is right.
Alvin is stupid. Lewis looks stupid too many times.
Ray, we've got 200 homicides in the city this year, and the only ones she's prosecuting are the guys who didn't even hurt anybody. I mean,
excuse me, what kind of message does it send that you say, well, they pointed guns at protesters, but we'll let it go? That isn't covered by the Second Amendment.
What kind of a message does it send when she doesn't take cases from 75 police officers?
Because which ones? You mean the ones that have lied on a witness stand or under investigation?
Ones who could be using that federal protocol to at least contest the charges openly, publicly, and defend themselves if she followed the Department of Justice guidelines.
She won by 21.
But the thing is that, all right, the conversation about the other police officers and murder and all that, see, that's why this is why it's so silly. And then if I were the prosecutor, I would have just sat them down and said, like, listen, we could go through this whole rigmarole, but you know what? I just want you to tell me you're sorry. That
She did. She offered him diversion.
No. That was, I'm just saying, I'm not going to charge you. I'm not going to charge you.
They're milking this.
They're milking it, and she's allowing it, and she's loving it. And who are the losers? Not Black Lives Matter protesters. St. Louis, this region. We look like clowns once again. Does somebody protect our image? Anybody?
Why don't we just send airfare to Charlotte for Michael Neidorff? What more can we do to tell him to leave?
Good point. Yes, exactly. Right.
Okay, Ray Hartmann, I want to ask you. You are a great columnist and a prolific one. The Riverfront Times, rawstory.com, and this week, I think in the RFT, you take a look at Amendment 3, which is cleaner. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but the opponents are calling it Cleaner Missouri after voters in 2018 passed Clean Missouri to kind of reform the legislature in their views. So now there's an amendment to that, which has got you all steamed and angry. Am I right?
Well, it's one of the worst disingenuous con jobs ever. When you go into the ballot box, folks, and you look at Amendment 3, like most people do for the first time, it's going to tell you, hey, we're eliminating lobbyist gifts. Guess what? We, the people, did that in 2018 with Clean Missouri. We reduced them to $5. The reason they left it at $5 was so you could get a cup of coffee or a plaque and not get in trouble. Well, guess what? They're reducing 5 to 0, but it doesn't say that. It just says, do you want to eliminate lobbyist gift? If you're willing to vote for something that's trying to con you like that, they did the same thing on the second. Oh, we're going to reduce legislative campaign limits. Guess what? They're taking one office, a state senator, and reducing them from 25 to 2,400, the campaign donation limits. They are trying to con you because of the third point. They don't want, even though the Republicans, they like this current system in which Republicans have 71% of the seats of both legislators. You show me a statewide ballot that has 71% of either party. It doesn't happen. This is about protecting gerrymandering. And yes, both sides would do it, but in this case, the Republicans are doing it. Don't vote no on 3.
Well,
vote no on 3.
I say vote yes.
No on 3.
Don't vote no on 3. Or
no, vote no on 3. Let me be clear.
Don't vote
on November 3rd on 3. And I think
it's double negatives there, big boy.
Here's what happens. In 2018, the proponents of Clean Missouri did the same thing. They had those, lobbyist gifts and other issues affecting lawmakers day to day, and that was front and center. But the real meat of this, and I think this is log rolling, they put too much into one particular measure. It's really about the redistricting. And by the way, this is supported. Half of the money in 2018, and a lot of it right now is coming from out of state. Family in Texas named Arnold, plus a DC group, Strategic Wealth, and then a North Carolina group. A lot of outstate money and a lot of organizations like Planned Parenthood and the unions and others that really want more Democrats elected to office.
Well,
but
Charlie,
the problem is the representative districts for the Senate and for the state representatives, they have to roughly mirror the overall Democratic Republican split in the state. And I just don't know how you're going to do that when you have so many Democrats concentrated in Kansas City and in St. Louis. And that's why I think that people like Rachel Crowley are against it.
Charlie, there's a situation in Wisconsin where more people vote for the Democrats in the state legislature, but the Republicans have not only a majority, but a super majority. They can do whatever they want. And that's really what people are trying to stop. And just saying that the legislatures should roughly mirror who the parties, the voters are supporting. So when you have a state where it's 52 to 48, it should be roughly halfway in the state legislature, not where it's you've put all the people of one party in this group and another here, and so that people who get 45% of the vote statewide have a 60% majority in the state legislature. That's not a good way to run a democracy.
That's right. But how do you rectify that when you have so many Democrats in Kansas City and in St. Louis, where some of the state rep districts are 90% Democratic? And then in rural Missouri, you're 90% Republican. So how are you going to have a compact and contiguous district that's 48-52?
I would use a computer and just start in the northeast corner of the state and just work your way down. I mean, there has to be some way to do it.
I agree. That's what I was going to say, that, rather than say it can't be done, I'm sure we could get 4 or 5 examples in a week of how it could be done. Well, but the party in control right now does not want that done, and that's what this I'm with Bill. This con job is all about. Not Bill, Brad.
So what you're going to have is a state representative district that I guess will go from North St. Louis to St. Charles.
No, all it has to do is veer at an angle. Because remember, I called it the zebra stripes,
you have to. Stripes.
Yeah, the zebra stripes. Yes. So yeah. Exactly.
But it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't work that way.
Charlie,
because
the answer,
how are you in St. Charles going to get Democrats in there?
Charlie, the answer is you appoint a nonpartisan demographer. No, this is what they do. And by the way, the same bipartisan commission that's there now still has to accept the results, but you get a demographer who is approved, by the way, by both parties in the legislature. It starts with the auditor, but they're trying to make this sound like, the auditor's going to redraw the maps. No, the auditor isn't. And you've got a demographer to figure out stuff that maybe we can't figure out.
And then what happens?
Picks the demographer? Who picks the demographer?
It's a complicated process. It is. But how are you? By the way, what do you do when the 3 applicants for the job don't have the experience? And that's where we are right now. The 3 people who applied really don't have experience in demography, so that's going to be interesting too. And then there's some other things about this. What was little reported, but actually the Post-Dispatch, I give him credit. Tamila Nasheed was on the payroll of Clean Missouri this summer, and that was against the law. So now there's a complaint against her in the Missouri Ethics Commission. And I'm just not sure that Clean Missouri is all that clean itself.
Yes, it is.
But Charlie, I can tell you, I bet you, like when we sign off tonight, we just put in Google, how do I make a representative map between Democrats and Republicans in the state of Missouri? And it probably just would pop up, right? I think it can be done.
Good enough. Alvin, let's stick with you then. Ascension Hospital says that employees, all of them, forever can work at home. That's going to revolutionize the workplace in our area and across the nation, don't you think?
I do. Look, when this is all over, and hopefully soon, I think let's put together a list of 10 things that we learned that are kind of good, okay? And that'll probably be at the top, in that the leading reason people could not work from home, even though laptops and desktops and computers have been around for 3 decades, is because that employers didn't think people were actually going to work. And they found out, because they had to, that, people do even more if they could just be working in their jammies and have a cup of coffee and, let the dog out and do all that. They're happy all day and they don't have to deal with you. And, this will be one, and it's a good thing. I'm sure you all have some reasons why it's not, but I can't see anything that's wrong with that.
I for one feel very badly for people like Stan Kroenke, who owns commercial real estate. I do seriously feel badly for everybody but Mr. Kroenke in commercial real estate, because they did not see this happening, and this has got to be very pain-inducing for them. But I do think there is an upside, and I agree with you, Alvin. I'm optimistic about it.
The downside I see is really for restaurants and bars. Like, when Jim McKelvey bought the Post-Dispatch building for Square, and all the people on Washington Avenue who have restaurants and bars thought, this is great. We're going to have hundreds of young, well-paid people coming for lunch and having a drink after work. And now, and Square lets people work from home already. So now if there's suddenly nobody downtown working and you have a downtown bar or restaurant, that's bad news.
Well, I want to say something, Charlie. A year from now, when President Biden's got us settled down and we're on the other side of the pandemic, I think we need to consider, and I agree with everything everybody's saying about commercial real estate, but there is some benefit to human interaction. And when we can get on the other side of this, even though, yes, there's going to be some savings for businesses and travel and stuff, I wouldn't want us to get into a world where we think has to be the long-term norm. I do think for companies, and to the point you're making, Bill, I mean, for the economy in general, I think having us interact down when it's safe, which it isn't now, I think we got to see a longer term.
Okay, final topic with about 2 minutes to go. Wendy Wiese, the new Archbishop for the Archdiocese of St. Louis, Mitchell Rosansky, sent out a missive this week. He said that abortion is the preeminent issue for people who are forming a conscience in the Roman Catholic tradition, but there are other issues that are also important, and they include race, immigration, and the environment. What was the message that was being sent?
I think the message is as it reads, that abortion is still, according to Catholic teaching, and by the way, you don't have to be Catholic to be pro-life. That's still the issue. But that people also should allow their consciences to be formed by what is happening in immigration, what's happening with the environment, and that kind of thing. But people always have such almost a not a violent reaction, but just short of a violent reaction, some people, to the church speaking out when nobody thinks anything, when a president says, God bless Planned Parenthood, and you almost feel like Planned Parenthood should be annexed by the federal government and just become part of the federal government. There are two sides to this issue. And one of those sides believes that 58 million aborted children and their children is enough.
Okay, 20 seconds to go. Anybody else?
Oh, okay, sure. I would say, as somebody from Northern Ireland who has generations of anti-Catholicism in my background, I thought that this was a complete cop-out, that, saying that this is the most important issue. There's other issues like immigration. It's because I think the Archbishop has been getting a lot of heat that the fact that he fired Marie Kenyon and took down the immigration website, and he's trying to make up with those people.
Okay, I'm sorry to say that's all the time we have for this discussion, but we'll continue in just a moment with Ken Kwapis, native of Belleville, Hollywood director, who's out with his new memoir. So we'll talk about working with everyone from Jennifer Aniston to Big Bird. That's next.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network. Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Thanks for joining us for the second half, and we are really pleased to welcome a native of Belleville who went to SLU High and became a great Hollywood director. He's the guy behind the Bernie Mac Show and ER, The Office, Malcolm in the Middle, and on the big silver screen. Among his movies, He's Just Not That Into You, Follow That Bird, Big Miracle, Dunstan Checks In, He Said, She Said, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, and many more. And now he's written a brand new memoir, ladies and gentlemen. What I really want to do is direct Ken Kwapis. Thank you for joining us from Hollywood, I presume.
Yes, I'm speaking to you from a garage in Hollywood, a garage converted into a music room. But yes, Hollywood is where I am.
Well, very cool, because on Olive Street in Grand Center, when one goes in the front door of the 9 Network, you're immediately greeted by Big Bird, a larger-than-life statue of Big Bird. And you, of course, directed Big Bird in the movie Follow That Bird.
The first film to feature the Sesame Street characters. Although I will say, some of your viewers who are like Muppet aficionados will know that Big Bird made a brief cameo in the film, The Muppet Movie. But
The original.
The original. But he had just a brief walk-on. But Follow That Bird was the first one to feature all the Sesame Street characters. And by the way, Big Bird is the only character capable of a walk-on because the others are. But yeah, and I feel very privileged to have started my feature filmmaking career working with the likes of Jim Henson, performing his signature characters, Kermit the Frog and Ernie, of Bert and Ernie, and Frank Oz, who created the great Cookie Monster and Grover, and of course Carol Spinney, who created both Oscar the Grouch and Big Bird. So, what a way to...
Well, I've got so many questions, and like I want to start there, But I was just so impressed with just how diverse the movies and television shows that you have worked on, and how like all coaches will say, "Well, I could coach anything," or business people could say, like, "I could run any business," and it's not true. That's just not true. But it seems like with your skills, just like I say, just a diverse portfolio. How did that happen? Why did that happen? Are those were the jobs that were offered to me, and I'm really good at what I do? So,
well, I guess by and large, I've done slightly lighter fare. But I mean, it's so funny you mentioned that, because about 10 years ago, my agent called me in a very affectionate way. He said, "We have a hard time selling you because nobody's quite sure what you do." That was a good thing. But I would just say that I look for material that just speaks to me personally. So, for example, I am hardly a teenage girl. I am not the demographic that Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants was aimed at, but I just so related, to the emotional storylines of those four characters played by America Ferrara, Alexis Bledel, Blake Lively, and Amber Tamblyn. So I just, again, for me, it's like, am I connecting with it on a human level? And even if it's Follow That Bird, I mean, I actually feel like I learned a lot from an 8-foot bird about the importance of, being a student of human nature as a director. So it's all about what's the emotional content, and can I connect to it?
Right.
Hi. Well, you're from, you're in Hollywood, but when you're from St. Louis, we don't let you forget that you're from the St. Louis area. And talk about, in fact, Lynn Venhouse, our KTRS film expert, says she grew up in the same grade school with you. And so you don't get away that easy. She says that you had a lot to do with a fellow St. Louis area native getting her start on The Office. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, there are 3 St. Louis natives who are in the ensemble. Of course, Jenna Fisher, Ellie Kemper, who I didn't have anything to do with the casting of Ellie, but I certainly had a lot to do with Phyllis Smith being on the show. And Phyllis, who I adore, did not audition for the show. In fact, she was working with the casting director. Her job, she was the casting associate, was to sit down next to me. So if let's see, let me do this right. I'm here, and Phyllis would be sitting next to me, and she would be reading the off-camera lines with the aspiring actors, the auditioners. And I found during the audition process that I became less and less interested in the actual actors who were coming in, but I was fascinated by Phyllis. She just kind of projected this wonderful sincerity, and she seemed to have, I didn't know her, but she seemed to exude what I will call a Midwestern vibe. And I just took the showrunner, Greg Daniels, aside, and I said, wow, she would be kind of perfect as a Dunder Mifflin employee. And he agreed, and we invited her to be on the show. Now, at the beginning, there was no character. She had no dialogue. And in fact, the showrunner just named her character Phyllis. We didn't, but I'm happy to say that, 9 seasons later, she grew into one of the most beloved members of that ensemble.
And speaking of Midwestern vibe, you still have it. I mean, I thought, reading your book, I expected some Hollywood snark somewhere. You managed to write a book about Hollywood without any Me Too stuff. Everybody, I mean, no snark at all. It was really terrific. And one of the sections that I really liked was about you and Gary Shandling and the Larry Sanders Show. And you talked about how you quit starting a scene with action and you started it with just go ahead. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, what Gary wanted to do, he wanted me to come up with a shooting style wherein the actors weren't actually sure whether the cameras were rolling or not. And it was actually a very impractical request. I couldn't quite figure out how to do it. So what I came up with was the idea that instead of barking out action, and by the way, when you start a scene, it's not just somebody saying action. There's, sound, rolling, speed. There's a bunch of, commands that are announced, and then the director says action. So what I did is I dispensed with all of those, including the word action. And once I got a head nod from the camera operators that the cameras were turning, I would just kind of turn to Gary and say, okay, go ahead. And he would either, if he would had the first line in the scene, he'd either launch into the scene, or he would just sort of start gabbing with the actors about who knows what. And at some point, he would literally he would just be chit chatty and then move right into the scene without a pause. So it kind of created, I think, in the performance style of that show, a very kind of conversational, just the opposite of what you'd expect in a traditional broadcast network half-hour comedy. It just had this kind of, again, conversational, well-observed kind of quality. And as a result, I just stopped using the word action altogether. So I guess it's been, 20 plus years now. I have not used that word except in conversations like this one.
Okay.
Well, I am going to embarrass myself, and I don't even care, because I think one of the ways that Phyllis's storyline really took off was because of her relationship with Bob Vance, Vance Refrigeration, and I mean, she was amazing. And your movies, I thought it was so interesting that you talked about the humanity and whether the scripts, the stories spoke to you, because he's just not that into you. I could talk to you about that movie for hours. License to Wed was one of the sweetest things I think I've ever seen. And Robin Williams, if you could talk a little bit about and John Krasinski, of course, who later was on The Office, but or at the same time. But speak to Robin Williams. The loss is still felt today, isn't it?
I had such a great time working with him. He loved the picture. He loved the idea of playing this kind of crackpot minister who puts John and Mandy through this trial. And so many people when they talk about Robin, talk about the kind of, what's the right way to put it? The kind of this fountain of creativity that just came out in his improv. And I'll just share one anecdote with you. This is not something I included in the book, but this is a one Robin Williams story that I will share. That when I was working on License to Wed, all the actors, maybe actors still do this, actors love to impersonate Christopher Walken. That's just like the favorite person to impersonate. And so one day on the set, maybe Krasinski was doing a Chris Walken, maybe another actor was doing it, but Robin, not to be outdone, started impersonating other people impersonating Chris Walken. So this was the classic, we're all playing chess, but Robin Williams is playing 3D chess. So he did, for example, Brando impersonating Chris Walken. He did, and each one got nuttier and nuttier. He did Stephen Hawking impersonating Chris Walken. I mean, so all I can say is I had a front row seat working with him. I got to observe his, genius up close and personal. So very missed.
And you also worked with Bernie Mac, another genius in many ways. Tell us about starting that series.
Yeah, one of the great things about Bernie, and again, this goes to the question, Alvin, that you had about, how do I look for material? One of the great things about Bernie's stand-up act, and I didn't see it except I saw the Spike Lee film, The Kings of Comedy, but I never got a chance to see his stand-up act live. But one of the things that I loved about it that I saw, on film and on tape, was that he didn't so much tell jokes as he did just tell stories about his own life. And a lot of the stories grew out of some very painful experiences. So again, one of the things that got me excited about being a part of launching that show was it just felt like it was coming from a real and personal place. And just, very specifically, I mean, today in the post, cable streaming era, there are a lot of half-hour shows that are tonally really, what's the right way to put it? Tonally challenging. Half-hour comedies that combine drama and comedy. But when the Bernie Mac show started, it was kind of a unique and kind of new thing to have a comedy where the premise was sort of steeped in a very, sad stuff. And in particular, in the story, Bernie's sister is a drug addict, and she can't take care of her kids anymore. And so they're shipped out from Chicago to Los Angeles, where he is in charge of them. So that's the setup for a family comedy. That's as I write in the book, we are not in the Cleaver neighborhood anymore. It's a whole. But again, what I loved about Bernie was he had been offered a lot of situation comedy opportunities, but he didn't want to do a traditional stand up in front of an audience or a multi-camera show. He wanted to do something low key, personal, conversational. And, one of the signature shots in the Bernie Mac show is just, Bernie facing the camera and talking to, America, as if America's his friend. And when we started the series, the way we shot those is I literally just sat next to the camera, the lens, and I leaned against the camera and I just say, Bernie, tell me what's going on. And he would launch into his scripted dialogue. So again, his goal was to kind of keep it conversational and personal. And so I feel, again, blessed that I got to work with that man.
Hey, two-parter here, but real quick. One, beginning as you did, like working with Jim Henson and going through that experience, did you find out, like, man, it was a lot easier working with the Muppets than it was actual people? And then, all right, no names, wackiest request. Just, share with us something where it's like, boy, that's odd.
You mean a wacky request from
actor or actress?
Wow, let me think about that.
Like in a writer, you mean, Alvin?
Oh, like me? I'm getting to that. I'm getting to the 60-year-old.
Like in a contract writer, like a writer for a contract.
No, I mean for somebody you worked with, actor, actress.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to skip that one first and go back to question number one. This is the hot seat. No, so was it easier to work with the Muppets? Not necessarily easier, but I'll tell you one thing I discovered is that the Muppets, the characters are often, they're much more sharply drawn than a lot of characters I've directed. Characters, not actors. Characters I've, directed since then, and I'll be very specific. They have such well-defined drives and needs. So, Cookie Monster needs cookies. He doesn't want pizza. He doesn't want caviar. He wants cookies. So, I mean, it seems kind of simplistic, but to me, those characters are memorable because their needs and desires and their drives are so clear. The Count can only do one thing. He's a monomaniac. He only wants the Count. So, I mean, I wish I could say, over the years, I've directed stories with characters that are so flabbily drawn that maybe have funny lines now and then, but have no strong drive. And so I feel like, weirdly enough, among the many things I learned from Jim Henson and the Muppets was, that characters need a clear motivation. So I'm going to get back to your second question. I got to think about it a little more.
Rip Torn.
Rip Torn did not have, well, I'm going to Alvin's question. Rip Torn did not have any odd requests. He was just a highly complicated guy and a very pugnacious actor. And I think you can look at the gray hair on my head right now. I think much of it came during my tenure on the Larry Sanders Show, working with, although I think maybe the better way to put it is wrangling Rip Torn. But by the way, brilliant actor, created a brilliant character, but complicated.
Ken, how about He Said, She Said? And how that got started and the concept of it.
Well, my now wife, Marissa Silver, and I were dating, and we had dinner with a friend an acquaintance at Musso and Frank's, actually, in Hollywood, venerable eatery. And this acquaintance said, so tell me how you guys met. And we'd only been dating a couple of years, but weirdly enough, we completely misremembered. I mean, the event of our meeting, that we got the details. We just remembered it so differently. And afterwards, we kind of went back to our apartment that we shared, and I suggested maybe we should develop a story about how neither of us can remember the events in our relationship. And without even thinking, she said, "Yeah, let's call it He Said, She Said." Now, I'm going to give her credit for coining that phrase. There's been a couple of variations on it in the past. There was, the Beatles song "She Said, She Said," but I really think it was Marissa who put that phrase on the map. And within a couple of years of that film coming out, it was I kept a clipping file for a while. Whenever there was a use of that phrase, whether it was the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas here. I mean, I saw a lot of He Said, She Said on that one. Woody Allen, Mia Farrow. So, but I finally just gave up. I had too many clippings. It wasn't worth keeping them anymore. So,
and Wendy stole my Robin Williams question. So let me ask you, what was it like in A Walk in the Woods? You had two megastars to direct at the same time, Nick Nolte and Robert Redford. What was that like?
Well, I mean, again, part of the job for me as a director is to, when you're working with people like that, you have to work hard to forget their icons and just they're actors, and we're all there to tell a story together. It's not that easy when one of your actors is named Robert Redford, but that was, that's what I did. But here's the thing though, Robert Redford is not only an actor, he's a director, he's a producer, he's the creator of Sundance. He's sort of changed the face of independent filmmaking in America. He's kind of iconic on a lot of levels. And, but at the outset, he was very upfront with me. He said, I'm taking all those hats off. I'm going to be an actor, and that's all. An actor. I want to be directed. So we actually had a great working relationship. And I will tell you, I write about this in the book, that during the shooting of the film, every Saturday night, he and I met for dinner to discuss the following week's work. And I would bring my script, I put it on the table, and I never opened it once, because for many weeks over dinner, he's just sort of waxed nostalgic about a 50-year career as an actor. And it was so, I felt like what a privileged position to be in, to get to kind of sit there and just hear Redford tell stories about the early days. He loved to circle back and talk about his earliest days as an actor, television actor, having a bit role in the show Route 66, for instance. We talked about that. Wow. So we never talked about the following week's work once. but now Nick was complicated in a kind of a different way. I mean, I think that Nick plays Bill Bryson's old pal Katz, and if you know the story of A Walk in the Woods, neither of these two men really should be tackling the Appalachian Trail, but Katz certainly shouldn't. And this is from Bryson's memoir. I mean, Katz was completely out of shape. Well, when I met Nick, the first thing I thought was, wow, he is in perfect shape for this role, meaning he is perfectly out of shape. and I would say one of the challenge, and he, by the way, Nick is so great. He was so invested in doing a great job on this piece, but walking the Appalachian Trail and doing it take after take after take to get the dialogue right was sometimes a little difficult. So he actually, I was going to just share one anecdote, is that, and I loved working with him, and we got on great, but one day, just out of frustration, he just sort of grabbed me and put me in a headlock. And I mean, again, it was very affectionate, but it was a headlock. And I remember afterwards, it was later in the day, I recalled the fact that that he was a college football player. I recalled that while I'm rubbing my neck. Oh my God.
Did Mr. Redford ask about me?
Repeatedly.
Okay, thank you for that. When it comes to the artistic community in this context, in a pandemic, how much of your time is spent these days communicating with your fellow artists, directors, actors, writers, whatever, about the impact of COVID-19 on the arts in our nation and in the world at large?
Well, I would say what I've observed during the pandemic is that creative people in Hollywood have really been super creative. And by that, I mean, kind of faced with certain kinds of restrictions, that, for instance, maybe you will only have limited cast members in your story, or, a smaller crew than normal. People, I think, have really stepped up and come up with some super great solutions. One of the things I observed early in the pandemic was I had many Zoom calls with writers and producers who were eager to come up with stories that involved maybe two characters only. And happily, you can point to a lot of great films where there's only two characters. I was talking the other day about the film Misery, the Rob Reiner film. That's a perfect one, and that's it, two people, the end. And so I think that, again, I've observed people getting really stepping up and being creative. I'm not really the right person to answer the question because I haven't been directing during the pandemic. I don't expect to be directing for the remainder of the year. I do know people who are getting back to work. The protocols are a little intense. I have a hunch that when I am next on a set directing, I'll have a face shield, and that the actors will all be masked until I say go ahead, and they'll take off their masks. My biggest concern is, and I feel like I've been fortunate to go back and forth between the big and the small screen, but my concern is that people have gotten out of people are out of the habit of going to the theater to see a movie. And I am a little concerned. I would love nothing more that when things loosen up again, that people are excited to go back to the theater rather than, we don't miss it as much as we thought.
Do you have a favorite movie experience here in St. Louis, a particular theater and a movie that you really enjoyed as a kid growing up?
There were so many. I'll mention a couple. I would say that. Why don't I mention? I'll mention movie theaters first. The Lincoln Theater in Belleville was the site of many formative movie-going experiences. Speaking of Robert Redford, that's where I first saw, and I saw it many times, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with my father. The film was rated, I believe, M, because they hadn't come up with the standard ratings yet. I will tell you, I have a very vivid memory of a shot of Catherine Ross with her shirt is open. Okay, you can't see her breasts, but the shirt is just slightly open, and the camera kind of tilts down or something. And my father helpfully put his hand in front of my eyes. And so the Lincoln is very important. I did a little homework on the Lincoln when I was writing the book, and I found out a great factoid, and that is that the Marx Brothers, early in their career, before they were called the Marx Brothers, I think they were called the Four Nightingales, maybe, they played the Lincoln. And it was during a performance at the Lincoln that Harpo introduced the bulb horn into the act. So to me, that's about as good as it gets. So
very cool.
And I would just say again, there's so many theaters. I saw so many great films at the High Point, the Esquire. I mean, we could go on. This is like a 3-hour episode we need for to answer that question.
Did you ever make it out to the Kirkwood Cinema? I worked there for 3 years.
I think so. Yeah, I kind of want to say.
They had the dollar show.
I definitely did. I mean, I will say that in the book, I devote one entire chapter to my first viewing of the film American Graffiti, which was at the Westport Twin, which no longer exists.
Right.
But
that's where I saw Airplane and American Graffiti. That's where where I've seen you before.
You saw
Well, that's where I saw American Graffiti at the Westport.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
while we're sharing stories, I saw Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and the 10:30 was like sold out. So my parents let me go to the midnight movie with my friends. You know, like, ooh, big deal. Okay,
We got 30 seconds to go. 30-second warning.
You touched on this real quick because people don't want to go. Is this going to bring the drive-in back? Could this breathe life into the drive-in theater after all this?
Well, I'm not the expert on this, except I will say that another chapter in my book, I pay tribute to the Skyview Drive-In in Belleville, which is not only still open, but apparently is going great guns right now. And
Exactly.
Somebody sent me an aerial photo of the Skyview in action with a line of cars waiting to get in. So I look at drive-ins are very important
Ken,
in my childhood. So I'm glad they're working.
that's a wrap, Ken. Thank you so much for joining us. But what I really want to do is direct lessons from a life behind the camera, written by Belleville native Ken Kwapis, kind enough to join us on this edition of Donnybrook Part 2. Thank you so much, and best to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.